Welcome, everybody. I'm Rabbi Sarah Bourbon. I'm Director of Adult Education here at Central Synagogue. This is Sir Oscar Lafloof. He's also joining us. And it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening as we begin to prepare ourselves in terms of our minds, our learning, and in terms of our hearts, our spirits for the high holidays. We have some really incredible guests this evening for us all to learn from in our three-part series, Understanding What We Sing. First, we have Cantor Richard Cohn, the past director of the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music at HUC. He's a past president of the American Conference of Cantors and a faculty member of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality's Clergy Leadership Program. Having served congregations in Metro Chicago and Dallas for 34 years, he is now the cantor in residence of Temple Beth Israel in Skokie, Illinois, and Tefillah prayer coordinator for HUC in New York. Joining Richard is Cantor Daniel Mutlu, who has been senior cantor at Central Synagogue since 2017. Upon his ordination from HUC's cantorial school in 2008, he served as cantor of Community Synagogue of Rye, New York, through 2011, and then served as cantor of Congregation Beth Israel of Houston, Texas from 2011 to 2017. And finally, our host, moderator, and facilitator for this evening, Abby Pogrebin. Abigail Pogrebin is the author of Stars of David, Prominent Jews Talk About Being Jewish, and My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wondering Jew. She moderates public conversations at the Stryker Center and the JCC and has written for The Atlantic, Tablet, New York Magazine, and The Forward. She is a proud past president of our synagogue. So now I turn us over to Abby's very capable hands for our conversation, Understanding What We Sing, preparing for our High Holy Days. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi Berman. It's great to be with all of you. I wish we could be in person, but we have more of a quorum by being virtual. And I want to set the stage here. First to say enormous gratitude to these giants of cantors. Those of us mostly on this Zoom know Dan Mutlu so well because we are his biggest fans. But I have long been a fan of Richard Cohn's as well. And he is a teacher of teachers to so many cantors you've enjoyed in your life. So just know that he is often behind the scenes, but someone who I think many have looked up to and learned from, whose music you've benefited from over the years, especially in the Reform world. So I want to set the stage. First, let's hear your voices, Dan and Richard, so they know you can speak.
I want to say I'm a fan of Dan Mutlu also, and of you, Abby, and of Central Synagogue, and of Rabbi Berman, and the cat.
I'm here, and I'm very flattered and grateful to be here. There's no better people to have a conversation about Jewish music and the Cantor and the High Holy Days. So let's get into it.
Yes, we're going to get into it. So this evening is going to be about Elul, which is the preparation for the High Holidays. Then we're going to do Rosh Hashanah for our second, Yom Kippur for our third. So we're really doing the preparation that I think is going to deepen our experience when we get there. But Elul, I think, especially Reform Jews, I'll just speak for many, even though it's audacious to do so. It's kind of the least understood. And I would imagine that the cantors agree that many of us don't have it as part of our practice, that in the 30 days leading up to the high holidays, we are actually supposed to start the process of introspection and kind of tearing ourselves apart, or at least looking honestly at the past year and our flaws. So I just want to start with you, Dan. If you can just explain, when you think about this holiday, there isn't a prescription actually for what we're supposed to do, but one of them is a prayer that you're going to be unpacking musically. Why the 27th Psalm, and what is Elul as you define it?
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I kind of made a joke on Friday night at the opening of services that this is a very nerve-wracking time for cantors and rabbis, and we've kind of stepped, across the divide into Elul. But I will tell you that from the days that we've been having since, you can really feel that energy, and there's excitement, but there's also a lot of anxiety. Because you feel a great deal of responsibility And I'm not just talking about as a community leader. You feel a great deal of responsibility as a human being getting ready for the high holy days, ready to confront yourself, confront God, confront others who you may have wronged. And it's not something that you can just step into on the day, on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, and without proper forethought and preparation. So for me, it's really a way to say that actually you do have time, and there's a regimen, there's kind of like a training program prescribed in these days leading up to Tishrei, and that it kind of quells the anxiety in a way, because you can use the time to prepare yourself. So
and let me just interrupt you for a minute, because one of the things that I think strikes me when I learned about Elul is that for those of us who are pounding our chests on the actual day, it's almost like sometimes the sins are going by so fast that you don't actually have time to focus on each one of them. And that Elul, in a sense, even though it sounds like who would want to break it down and spend more time with our mistakes, it does allow the reflection to be deeper, slower. You're also not starving. You're not doing it when you're fasting. When I interviewed Yitz Greenberg, who I know you know from by reputation, he's now in his 80s, but incredible teacher and writer. He talked about how essentially it's not just a preparation, but he talked about cheshbon hanefesh, accounting of the soul. So why, when I'm sort of skipping ahead to the fact that we are supposed to read Psalm 27 every day, why is that psalm important for this holiday, as you can kind of set the stage for the musical piece you're going to tell us about?
Yeah, there's so much to say about Psalm 27. There are three solid reasons as to why it's there, right? So the first one is that there's actually a midrash, which refers to the first word that refers to God in the psalm, Ori, my light, that actually alludes to Rosh Hashanah. And then later on, when you get into the psalm, and it says, and God shall bring forth your righteousness. I'm sorry, that's actually from Psalm 37, which is part of that midrash. But Yishi, later in that verse, my salvation, relates to Yom Kippur. And then Mimi Ira, whom I shall fear, also referring to God, refers to the end of those holidays, Hoshana Rabbah. So it's kind of like within this psalm, the midrash relates all of these different ways of talking about God to this period of reflecting. The other reason is a really, really cool reason. Towards the end of the psalm, the psalmist asks this really incredible question, kind of, it's almost a cliffhanger, and says, Lulei he'emanti lir'ot betuv Adonai be'eretz chaim, and just kind of like leaves you hanging. Had I not the assurance that I would enjoy the goodness of God in the land of the living? Almost rhetorically, like, how could I even question not having the faith? And that word lulei, which is had I not the assurance, backwards spells Elul. There's a lot of magic with this word Elul, as we know, ani, lidodi, vidodi, li is also part of the acrostic magic. But the final reason, which is really, really incredible, kind of proof text reason for why we read this psalm, is that in Psalm 27, God's name is mentioned 13 times. And 13 is related to the 13 attributes of mercy. So the Adonai, Adonai, which of course is in
which is what Richard's going to talk about. And Richard, I don't want you to jump to your song yet, but I want to bring you in here for a minute on just the theme that you actually suggested for this first exploration, preparing to turn inward. So before we get to Dan sort of breaking down Psalm 27, because we haven't even read the words yet, although I'm sure many will be familiar, can you just give us kind of a little bit more of a sort of 10,000 feet what this period of time should be spiritually for us?
Well, thank you, and hi, everybody. Sure, I'd like to say a few words about that. The interesting thing is that although we are preoccupied with recognizing our shortcomings, addressing them, making right with our family and our friends and our coworkers and our neighbors during this period, And it might seem almost overwhelmingly intimidating, like we're just in awe of everything that we could have done differently and we're not sure how to proceed. The good news is that those attributes of God flow from a space of compassion, of receptivity, of empathy, of hope, of comfort, of embracing. And Elul and the High Holy Days that follow carefully and in a very nuanced way balance that trepidation around loss and fear and brokenness with a tremendous amount of love and kindness and encouragement. And the probing that we do is from within and almost shining a light outwards from our hearts and from our souls, illuminating the places that may have been in darkness and bringing to them a new light and a new sense of possibility as we celebrate the new year. And the music helps us to do that.
Well, I want to just push you a little bit on the positivity, because I think I personally feel more fear than warmth and open-heartedness at this time. And it's just, I think it's more than actual terror. It's just the sobering, kind of bracing idea that we may not get another year. That these days are going to actually matter in kind of our personal reckoning on frankly whether we get to see another day. And is that fear necessarily such a bad thing? That kind of focus, even particularly in August when I think it's not where my head is or my head wants to be. Can you push us a little bit to why we should actually do sort of the hard work right now of realizing the stakes are high?
Sure, and I think that it is a very portentous time, and I don't disagree with that in the slightest. I guess what I'm saying is that this theme of repentance is something that can happen in every moment, and that the kindness, the grace, and the compassion are reflected in our ability in an instant to turn something, to radiate it with light and with love. And so these work in tandem with each other throughout the holy days. And we find music that is meant to engender awe and concern, reverence, and even the fear that we're discussing within us, but also music that enwraps us and envelops us and lifts us. And sometimes that can turn on just one or two notes that can be heard and understood by the soul, either as notes of concern or as notes of hope. And that's really kind of in these three sessions where we're going to go exploring how do those things turn so that the turning and the returning happen in between the notes and in between the harmonies. And
nice. I love that. And returning, obviously, tshuva is return, which we're going to talk about. Dan, let's talk about your lyrics, which are obviously verses. Can you read some of them? Maybe not the whole, but give us a sense of kind of what the language of Psalm 27 before you sing us a few bars.
Sure. Yeah. So it reads. It starts. This is of David. This is a psalm of David. Adonai is my light, that's the Ori that I spoke of, and my help. Whom shall I fear? Adonai is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? When evil people assail me to devour me, it is they, my foes and my enemies, who stumble and fail. Should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear. Should war beset me, still would I be confident. And then we arrive at the Achat Sha'alti verse 4. One thing I ask of Adonai, only one thing I seek, to live in the house of God all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of God, to frequent God's temple. And I just wanted to say that part of the preparation too, we prepare ourselves, but we also prepare ourselves to look at God in this different way. The liturgy actually shifts on the High Holy Days to use different adjectives to describe God. Instead of saying Ha'el, the God, in certain prayers, we say Hamelech, the sovereign. There's a certain kind of authority, and there is a certain kind of fear, as you were describing, Abby. We're kind of preparing ourselves to meet that God to whom we are responsible. And I don't think we can just get in there on Yom Kippur without having done that work to see God as that being who is responsible, and who really does know and who judges us for how we behave.
I love that. I mean, I don't love the fear of it, but I love the frame. When I just want to read this one part, which you didn't get to, and I know we didn't want to read it all, but it strikes me as particularly entreating, plaintive, like almost begging, which is, do not hide your face from me. Do not thrust aside your servant in anger. You have ever been my help. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me. And some of you on this call know that I did a book on on all of the holidays. And so it was a new practice for me to read this every day. And I found, as we often do in our tradition, that each day I read these words, they spoke to me differently. And they were the same words. And that some part of me was like, why am I reading the same psalm? Why not vary it? Vary the language, vary the liturgy. But there is something about doing the same, in a way, the same song, the same poem every day, day after day, and noting how your life is informing those words, or those words are informing your experience. Does that resonate for you?
Absolutely. And this fear of abandonment by God that you were talking about is exactly that kind of sentiment that's expressed in some of the other High Holy Day liturgy, like Shema Kolenu. Please hear our voice. Do not cast us away. Do not abandon us. In our frailty. And again, that's kind of establishing that relationship between us and God during this time. And by reading this psalm over and over again, we kind of reset our frame for the holidays. But as you know, the end of the psalm really ends with this statement of faith. There is anxiety. There's there are all these petitions of the things that we need, but it ultimately ends with hope and with faith that we will be restored. We will come back to God, and can only do so through this work, through this self-seeking.
So, Dan, can I put you on the spot before you actually sing the song, the rendition or the version that you are sharing today? What are some of the more traditional, or even one of the traditional settings of this psalm musically that some might have heard, in their travels in synagogue or outside? And am I correct that this is sung on Slichot, which is the Saturday before Rosh Hashanah?
Yep, you can sing Achat Sha'alti on Slichot, but the melody that is the most traditional, and even central members would know pretty well, it has a very lilting quality to it, and it sounds like this. Achat sha'alti met Adonai ota vakesh shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker beheichalo. So there's
First of all, applause. I'm sure everyone right now.
Yeah, well,
beautiful.
and it's interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the setting that we sing more often now at Central, which was written by Chava Morel, a fantastic West Coast song leader and cantorial soloist.
Very young. I mean, Chava's young. Like, she wrote this in the last 5 years.
Oh yeah,
you're about to sing.
Yes, this is pretty.
It's
new,
one of my favorites.
Well, in fact, we love it so much that we had her commission. We commissioned a song for our newly redone Yom Kippur Machzor, where we focused on this text from Genesis, Hitalech lifanai veyeh tamim, walk in my ways and you shall be wholehearted. And they're strikingly similar, actually, the tunes. There's a serenity, there's a calmness, and she uses a very simple form of 4 chords over and over again, but then stacks different melodies and harmonies on top of that. And you can either sing in both these songs, in Achat Sha'alti and in Hitalech, you can sing them as rounds or you can sing them on their own. So there's almost that duality of working on yourself and singing to yourself, but also being able to sing in community and to kind of enhance each other through that harmony.
And before we hear Dan, Richard, I just want to ask you about this central piece that is I think considered to be kind of is it the core of this psalm. One thing I ask of the Lord, Dan read this, but I'm repeating it. One thing I ask of the Lord, only that do I seek to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to frequent the Lord's temple, God's temple. I want to just ask you about one thing. That just struck me, and I know it's going to be in the lyric, one thing, Ahava repeats. And it just felt almost like a contemporary structure. I mean, I know the Hebrew is kind of different, but it's like just this, please, just this. Can you just comment on that idea that this more than anything is what I'm asking for?
You know, I think it may even be marked in the Hebrew text with a break after achat, meaning achat.
It is. Yep.
It's very, very clear. And there are a lot of explanatory texts about this. I think it is in part to ask ourselves, what does it mean to dwell in God's house? And is it possible through bringing our intention to the work of the soul in Elul that we are automatically in God's house? In other words, it's not necessarily going searching for where the house is. It's building the house around our own qualities and our own decisions and our own interactions with others during this time. And we create that house of God in our work of the season.
I love that. I mean, you're saying the house is us in many ways. It's not just to live in God's house.
We've each got
Dan,
a chamber, yeah.
Are you ready to regale us? And I want to remind people that we're going to talk more about this song after he sings it, but we're going to go to questions as well after Richard unpacks the next piece.
Thank you. Okay, here it is. This is Psalm 27, verse 4, Achat Sha'alti Chava Morel. Achat Sha'alti Me'et Adonai, Achat Sha'alti Ota Vakesh, Shivti, Shivti Beveit Adonai, Shivti, Shivti Kol Yemei Chayai Lachazot B'Noam Adonai Ulvaker Behechalo Lachazot B'Noam Adonai, to gaze upon the beauty of Adonai. One thing I ask you, Adonai, to be with you all of my life. Achat Sha'alti Me'et Adonai, Achat Sha'alti Ota Vakesh.
It was just gorgeous. One of the things that struck me, I mean, so many things struck me listening to it, in addition to just its beauty, but it's intimacy. It's intimacy. It felt like I'm having a conversation with God. You're having a conversation with God that I think some of us don't necessarily always feel entitled to. And it struck me that, again, when I was sort of studying the arc of the fall holidays and realizing just they're like 6 in a row until you get to Shmini Atzeret, which is probably the most esoteric, after Sukkot, after Hoshana Rabbah. And Shmini Atzeret is basically like stay a while, right? It's like stop a minute. And it's almost like God is saying, stay with me one more day. Stay with me one more day. And it's interesting. It just struck me now that we're listening to you, that we're starting by saying, can I be with you? Can I spend this time with you? Am I off on some kind of crazy tangent?
Oh, no, I mean, well, you're leading into our next liturgy so beautifully because, and I won't say too much, but there have been prophets and sages who have so longed to be with God, to see God, to experience God. And it's not just a curiosity, right? It's not just, hey God, what do you look like? What is your presence like? In the cases that we see where the sages have begged to feel God's presence, it is for the purpose of reassurance. It's for the purpose of calming our anxieties. And that's why I think what's fascinating about Psalm 27 is that, we start with confidence in God. We have this petition, Achat Sha'alti, and you so beautifully stated it, Abby. It feels very modern in a way. Just this one thing. So this central petition and saying that we want to gaze upon the beauty of Adonai. I love how Chava sets that text and how she renders that text. But then you have in the middle of it this real fear. This fear that we're going to be abandoned, the fear that we are not going to have our needs met or heard even. And that is where that urgent plea, that urgent request to God, like, can I just be with you and see you and know that you're near so that I know that things will be okay.
Beautiful. So, Richard, and I should just say that these cantors allowed me to call them by their first names. It's not that I'm being disrespectful in any way, just for the sake of efficiency. Richard, we want to bring you in with your liturgy. And in addition, as you set it up, because it does dovetail, I think, nicely, is just to anchor us as to when it happens. Like, when do we hear it? When do we sing it? Many people are going to be, I think, more familiar with your liturgy than Dan's. No competition, Dan, at all.
No worries.
But just that sometimes I feel like we just don't, chronologically, we don't know where we are. Those of us who are lay folks out there in the pews. So when do we sing Adonai, Adonai? And in this case, we sing it more than once, correct?
We do, and I'll give us an itinerary of those destinations. And Dan, that was so soothing and really brought out these great qualities. And Chava, creates this sense of yearning in a particular way. We're going to experience it very differently in Adonai, Adonai. So many of us are familiar with this text, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Adonai, Adonai, God who is compassionate and gracious and so forth. And we'll get the whole text in just a minute. But the context is that this citation from the book of Exodus actually forms the core liturgical component of Slichot, of the introductory formal prayer season toward the High Holy Days. We hear it in Slichot, in traditional Slichot, again and again and again. We hear it in the Torah service on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. We hear it in Ne'ilah, in some liturgies more than once in that service. We're going to hear Adonai, Adonai on the festivals, in Pesach, in Shavuot, in Sukkot, also in the Torah service. And it's really emphasized. I'm trying to think, Dan, if there are other important moments that this text is brought out.
I just want to jump in and make sure people know that Slichot is penitential prayers. If you've never been at Central, it's actually pretty amazing. It happens late Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah. But Slicha means forgiveness, right? Like we say sorry. Am I right about that? Just so
right. So much about saying sorry. And Dan, were you thinking of another instance of Adonai, Adonai?
I think you covered all of them. I think you got them all.
Okay, great.
Richard, can I just put you on the spot to just, again, right there without music or anything, just sing that first line so I really want people to realize they know this so well.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm going to give it in Hebrew and in English at the same time. So it begins. This is, by the way, a setting by Max Kotlowitz, who was a cantor born at the end of the 19th century, who came to in Eastern Europe, who came to America and was a cantor in Baltimore, and captured the essence of this prayer so beautifully in his melody, which was based on antecedents that were inherited and which we hear all the time during High Holy Days. So here's how it goes. Adonai, Adonai, Yirachum v'chanun. So the ineffable name twice, and then God compassionate and gracious, Erech Apayim, exceedingly patient, V'rav chesed v'emet, and abundant in kindness and truthfulness, Notzer chesed la'alafim, sustaining kindness, loving kindness to 1,000 generations, citing the Ten Commandments, where it says that things that we may have done that were harmful or destructive or painful resonate for 3 to 4 generations, but kindness is heard, is felt, is experienced for 1,000 generations, an incredible length of time. And la'alafim, to the 1,000th, is raised in this music to the highest note. And then it goes on to enumerate the sections of the liturgy for High Holy Days that come in categories of shortcoming. And those categories are avon and pesha and chata'ah. And in the music it goes, no say avon v'fesha v'chata'ah. The 3 categories of different stages of falling short of wrongdoing in certain instances, with this plaintive melody that was already started in the beginning of the music. And then at the end of each repetition, the word v'nakeh, v'nakeh, making it cleansed, pardoning, forgiving, making us whole again. And in this music that is in an arrangement by Dave Strickland, whom we all know and love, it comes out in stages. There are 3 total statements of the music. First, from a place of humility, and then perhaps from a place of insistence, and then from a place of encounter that has a resolution at the end, that we pray so deeply that our prayers will have been heard and there will be forgiveness in the end of this.
Amazing, Richard. Just the idea that you did the pairing, that was so helpful, because these are 13 attributes, and it's often very hard to separate, like, where's the 13 happening if you count them. It was beautiful. I just want to just make sure people understand that essentially this is when Moses goes up for the tablets again. Am I right? And it's not clear that the people have committed this sin of the golden calf. God is furious. Moses is very angry as well. This is like, are they going to actually be forgiven by God, or have they sort of blown it already?
Right. So like the golden calf incident is the archetypical falling short. Wow, we really got it wrong on this one. And, Moses goes up, and there's a whole thing in the Talmud that's amazing about this episode of Moses, who's asked God in the previous chapter to reveal God's self. And in this new encounter, God self-describes through these attributes. If you want to understand me, you will experience me through compassion, through graciousness, through patience, through loving kindness balanced with what's true. And the Talmud has this fascinating conversation that declares, this is an old text, the Talmud, for crying out loud. It says it's as if God put on a talit. And so you have to imagine, since God is not physical being. How would God put on a talit? And I think a talit of light, we say, God spreads light as if it were a curtain through all creation. So imagine God donning a talit, and it says, as if shliach tzibur, as if the emissary of the congregation. Wait, of God or of the congregation? Of the congregation. God puts God's self in the place of the leader of prayer, and then, according to the Talmud, explains to Moses, here's how you're going to pray. And how you're going to pray is you're going to sing Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. And whenever you're seeking forgiveness, this is your script. It is the core script of appealing for forgiveness, in that case for repentance, right? For the process.
But Richard, I just want to. So what you're saying then, which is that it's more like God is asking us to have to find these attributes, or strive for these attributes in ourselves. It's not that God is saying, because just to complete the story, when Moses is kind of fighting on behalf of his people and saying, you've got to give them another chance, God says, I'll do that if they recite these things about me. It almost sounds as if he's saying, God is saying, God is saying, I need to hear these 13 attributes, these compliments, in order to forgive. And you're saying it's not at all that quid pro quo. It's not a barter situation or God needing that praise. You're saying that God is challenging us and saying, this is how you're going to repent, is going to strive to be better.
I'll go even a step farther, Abby. Your description is perfect. Other commentators say that no matter how much we repeat these words and sing them and allow them to flow through our hearts, the real question is whether we're being compassionate, whether we're being gracious, whether we're being patient, whether we're balancing kindness and truth, and whether we're forgiving. So the music, so the music's both faces us and comes from within, right? It confronts us, but it also is an opportunity for us to act in alignment with what our prayers say and sing. There's a whole thing about that there should be a minyan for singing the Shlosh Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes, that it takes a whole community to sing it. And that, in fact, if you're saying the prayers by yourself, you should simply chant them according to the Torah cantillation, to the Torah trope. But when you're with a community, you should let the heart flow fully with this yearning for reconciliation, if you want to call it that. And this is the melody for that. Yadam ta yadam. It's just powerful.
I want to go to bring you in, Dan, on this, because when I love it when you sing this, and I feel like each time it's almost like you're revving the engine a little bit more. And I just wonder if that's conscious. It's conscious. It's almost like, it's not just even that you're building it. That feels almost too pedant. I mean, sort of sophomoric to say it, but it feels like it's a different piece each time. And is that something you're doing intentionally?
Absolutely. So what I'm doing is actually picking out different harmonies in the chordal structure and almost singing a descant line over the melody. During the holidays, we have our folk choir, and again, through Dave's brilliant arrangement, all the parts are covered, including the melody. And so I kind of strive to create a ninth part. He wrote it for 8 voices. Dave, he arranged it for 8 voices. And I try to strive to create a ninth part that increases in intensity, just as Richard was saying, for that pleading, that yearning reaches ever higher. It also reminds me of how traditionally we chant Kol Nidre 3 times. And in many communities, Kol Nidre, when you chant it the second time, you're supposed to take it a half step up. And then when you chant it the third time, you take it another half step up. Now, we have an incredible thing that we do in our community with Kol Nidre. We don't sing it all the way through 3 times, but we do listen to it 3 times. And each time it grows in intensity. just like the way we strive to sing Adonai Adonai grows in intensity as a way to plead and yearn. The other thing I would say, it's really interesting just listening to your brilliant description, Richard, is that so many of the versions, the traditional versions of this melody are in the same mode. They're in a minor mode, and they have that 3 feel, which the combination of both those things feels very yearning and pleading. So I think of like the Lewandowski version, which is very similar. I'll just sing a tiny bit of it. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet. It's got that same kind of lilting and pleading.
Wow. Can you do another one? Does another one come to mind?
Well, I'll have to search my files, but
okay.
That's the one I used to sing actually before coming to Central, and it's so similar to the Kotlowitz because it climaxes in the same place, right? Alafim, which is I also think it we're constantly reminding God of God's compassion and the power of God's compassion. It's interesting, right after, I don't mean to be a killjoy, but right after those verses in the Torah, it says, and will visit the iniquities of children up to the 4th generation. That really bothers some people, right? How can God be this God that punishes children? But I think in the way that the Torah was so brilliantly inspired, it's this juxtaposition of, the consequences of your ancestors can really shape you for good and for negative. But if you're kind to God, if you're good to each other, if you embody these attributes, then you'll get to that 1,000-fold love and graciousness. And I think that duality is really important to keep in mind because that's the language of the Torah.
I want to listen, Richard, to your recording. And Richard, did you want to say something before we go to the videotape?
Just one thing to add to Dan's excellent elaboration there. So as we listen, be attentive to Dave Strickland's organ realization of the piece. Because although it's true that I sing it a little differently in the 3 times, same melody except for one note, and the ending. But what's really going on, and we'll hear it every week in the excerpts that I was fortunate to be able to record with Dave in the Central Sanctuary last week, which was an incredible experience for me. Listen for how the registration of the organ and the intensity of that sound and its colors and its domain inform the progression of the 3 hearings of this piece.
And before we again hear it, I just want you, because you had mentioned to me off camera, and I thought it was actually very moving, that this is the first time you've sung at Central when it was empty, and to be in that sanctuary and obviously be singing this piece. Can you just give us a little bit of a slice of what that felt like?
I will. Abby, it was empty and it was full. So it was Dave and I and the excellent technical team were the only people there. And I've never sung this piece standing in front of the Ark with the doors open and the Sifrei Torah, the Torah scrolls all gathered as witnesses, so to speak, and done so in a space with such silent presence, almost as if everyone who's ever been in attendance at High Holy Day services anywhere was quietly a witness as well to this moment of reverence. For me, it was very awe-inspiring and personal. And although this music is much more formal than what we heard Dan sing a little bit earlier, it had an incredible intimacy in the grandeur of the space and the presence.
Adonai, Adonai Yilrachum v'chanun Erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet Notzer chesed la'alafim Nosei avon v'afesha v'chata v'nakeh Adonai, Adonai Yilrachum v'chanun Erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet Notzer chesed la'alafim Nosei avon v'afesha v'chata v'nakeh Adonai, Adonai Yilrachum v'chanun Erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet Notzer chesed la'alafim Nosei avon v'afesha v'chata v'nakeh.
Whoa. Bravo. My gosh, Richard, I've never seen you really in the zone. That was amazing.
Thanks, Abby.
So I'm not even giving people time to process what I'm sure they're processing. So much to say, but I want to go to some of these questions. And one of them kind of comes out of, I think, the power of what we just heard. And that is, how do cantors prepare vocally for the high holidays? This is coming from Carrie Keating-Liu. And I'm going to ask you both to, jump in, but be kind of tight, because I want to make sure we get to all of these. It obviously is the Super Bowl. So what's happening in these, not just days of, pre-atonement, but days of singing like you've never sung before?
This is a great question from a singer. Carrie's a singer and a cantorial soloist herself. So a wonderful singer. So the holidays, kind of like Elul, is this time where we prepare. Every cantor has to go through a slew of rehearsals. I could see Richard smiling there. Rehearsals with the choir, rehearsals with the instrumentalists, rehearsals one-on-one with your accompanist, and that kind of builds your stamina throughout those weeks leading up to the holidays. Every cantor has a different routine, a different preparation method. I actually try not to sing too much, especially Kol Nidre going into Yom Kippur. I don't do too much warm up because there's almost like a natural groove that you have to get into while you're singing, and you don't want to. There's an expression, you don't want to sing the bloom off of your voice, so you have to kind of pace yourself. So this is a little bit of an inside secret, but I almost treat some of the services themselves as a warm up, just because you have to pace yourself in terms of stamina.
Richard, did you want to add anything to that?
It's just good habits, hydration, some rest if you can get it, a little bit of steaming, just smart things. And I agree with Dan. A little bit of doing less yields more, and doing the internal work of trying to connect to the meaning of what's going to happen.
Howard Sharfstein is asking, why does our faith ask us to open ourselves and be a supplicant before God each year on the high holidays? Why do we believe we need to be reminded? Richard, you want to start there?
I will start. In traditional circles, it is always, of course, during High Holy Days, but also on Mondays and Thursdays in what's called Tachanun, prayers for forgiveness, prayers for graciousness. Avinu Malkeinu appears. Adonai, Adonai sometimes appears in certain rites. It's a constant bringing us back to awareness, to understanding that, as we often say, it's a narrow bridge and it's difficult to cross, and it is going to be fearsome, even if we're not supposed to live in fear. And to be realistic about transforming the world and bringing about healing and wholeness requires constant determination. And so the High Holy Days in particular are the large-scale embodiment of that, where as a community, we make the commitment.
Thank you. Dan, Gail Fine is asking, how do you decide what new to add to the service, or do you just stick with what you've done in the past?
Oh, such a great question. It's a balancing act. And the High Holy Days are a very slow-moving ship, and you want everybody aboard. So people only get to hear these melodies at this time of the year. And if you change them too quickly, you're going to lose folks, right? So it takes a long time to really establish a melody. So you change little, and you pick your moments and your opportunities very carefully. But it's one of the wonderful things about the holidays that we sing a style of music that actually is quite different from the rest of the year. And we don't change the music with the same pace that we can change it week to week on Shabbat. But very slowly, very cautiously and mindfully.
Great. Richard, will you answer Ina Beth? And maybe Dan can jump in, but again, I'm being a little condensed because of time. She's asking, what kind of emotions do you go through reciting the music? I think we'd love to hear from both of you on that. And I want to add to that a little bit of just, there is so much technically that has to happen musically and vocally, and in terms of filling the space, in terms of frankly hitting these notes that are clearly not so easy. In terms of remembering the words, maybe that's like falling off a log for you all, but it feels like there's a lot of liturgy to kind of make your own. So where does your own sort of emotional experience happen? Richard, why don't you start?
I will. There's a lot of range to be covered in High Holy Days. When we start out on Rosh Hashanah, there's exuberance, there's engagement, there's a sense of community and connection, and that presents as a feeling of joy and as a feeling of radiance almost. And then there are all these other textures that emerge. For me, some of the most important are the most quiet moments, not always the big musical pieces, but just, and in particular, the ones that are directly engaged with the community, with the congregation, where there is call and response and people sing, or where people in the community join the choral parts or just spontaneously connect. That's more of a feeling of, I don't know what that is, eminence of some kind. It's not really a feeling, but it's really amazing.
Dan, did you want to comment on your emotional journey?
Yeah, the word emotion is so important for a chazan, for a cantor. I think what sets cantorial music, chazanut, apart from many musical styles is that upsurge of emotions and kind of wearing that emotion on your sleeve. It's what made the cantors of the 19th century virtuosic. They really focused on expressing their emotions through their voice. And I would say some of the most powerful emotions that I experience in worship, in addition to what Richard said, singing in community, are really the moments that I lose myself in the music in the moment, and almost recklessly, because you can have a mystical experience where you don't know where you are in the bar, in the music, in the, you're kind of letting some other force take over. And I think that's trying to lock into, tap into, that ancient tradition of carrying the prayers of the people.
Mm. So I'm going to end with a question that came from Gary Sugarman. He's sort of putting you on the spot in terms of your personal work here. So I'll leave it up to you as to how personal you want to get. What is one thing that each of you do, that each of you look to remind yourself to do better each year? What is one thing that each of you do to remind yourself to do better each year?
I could go first. I think it definitely depends on the year, and I think finding and maintaining balance in life is really difficult, and it's the kind of thing that we can, that I personally can look back on and say, oh, I didn't do that enough. I wasn't present enough there, and I think I would say being present is what I'm always working on, because our minds are racing, to every next thing that we want to accomplish or that we want to make sure that we get done, and stopping to being present and to be human with others is something that I'm working on. Thank you for that,
Richard.
Yeah, I'll only add this. For me, it's about quality of relationship. That's certainly important for me at home, where I don't always meet my highest expectations, but intend to bring my heart to that opportunity to reconnect, and also with colleagues and with members of the choir and with instrumentalists and with staff members and with the congregants in every row of the shul, and with people in the various areas of my life, who acknowledge this season in special ways just by checking in.
Well, thank you both for this. I think it's a really beautiful start. I certainly learned a great deal. I want to thank Rabbi Sarah Berman for being kind of the engine behind this all, and all the people behind the scenes who have helped so much. And thank you all. I hope you have a meaningful Elul. And even though we're in the hard stuff, there's great beauty too. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Abby.